Hi everybody, I'm Tracy Swedlow and this is Television Nation, the Swedlow Show, and I'm super proud to bring to you my ex-boss, Steve Michelson, who is a great a person who has helped invent the TV industry as we know it, has been foundational on the independent video scene and advertising, and did all kinds of things that were innovative at the time, which is why I said yes. Back in the day. Welcome, Steve. I'm so thrilled you're here. We have so much to talk about.
Thank you, Tracy.
So you've had a front seat on media, right? Your whole family has been involved. You told me what your great uncle, your grandfather, now I can't remember, who figured out the speed of light, the actual speed of light. And so your whole family has been deeply involved in the technology that allows us to have television, and I'm forever grateful for that. So without drifting into too much, behind the scenes detail, because I want to talk about cause documentaries, I want to talk about AI with you, I want to talk about your years of media, 75 years of media, or the family and in this business, so much to discuss. So can you talk to me a little bit, give me the highlights about how your family was devoted to the evolution of media or television in general, from mass audience broadcasting to today's hyper-targeted environment?
Yeah, that's a good term. Yeah, it all started with my grandfather, and he got into radio. Before television, there was radio. That was the first mass market medium. And my father became really focused on the old-time radio shows, and my family actually acquired some 52 different series, the Lone Ranger, the Green Hornet, Dragnet, you name it. And I grew up in a world where radio and TV were pretty much everything that my family was involved with. At one point, my father acquired the very first quarter-inch reel-to-reel audio recorder, and our family set out to create sound effects for the old-time radio shows. And we literally created what was in the 1950s, 1956, according to the New York Post article that they wrote on us, our family. We had tens of thousands of sound effects that all went into the radio shows at that time. And when television came around, everyone thought radio would be dead, which was far from the truth, and tends to be the case with most media, that the older stuff tends to stick around for a while and thrive. But my father got into television and became one of the United States' top international film distributor, representing over 55 countries around the world. So as a child, I was, would say to him, like, Dad, why can't you distribute films like what we watch as a family? Every Thursday night, we would watch Jacques Cousteau, and he would be distributing programs like Hee Haw, which to world audiences was a big hit. And he said to me words that I'll never forget. He said, son, no one wants to solve the world's problems. And when people come home from a hard day at work, they just want to have a beer and put up their feet and have a good laugh. And that's what we do as a family, entertainment. So
my dad said the same thing. He, because I used to say, Dad, why aren't you watching the interesting classic series films I'm interested in? Like Casablanca. He's like, look, I spent the whole day working as a lawyer, thinking, and now I just want to relax. He said the same thing. So I understand.
Well, some things prevail from generation to generation. But I moved to San Francisco because public television was just beginning, and I was actually involved with the birth of television, public television at my college, where I attended the Annenberg School of Communications, and we were doing research on what were the first 5 stations in public television. And I remember vividly the time as a child when color television came around. I think I was around 12 years old when we had a color television set in the 1960s. And, that was a very formative moment for me and my family. And,
did you watch the landing on the moon in 1969, July 20th? Did you see that?
I did. I was in college then, and I was on the road in Fresno, California. I remember pulling off and staying in a hotel just to watch it. It was a great example of, a media moment that one will never forget. And I can mention a number of others that are, in that category, like the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I remember that vividly as well. So, yeah, media has a major effect on the brain. Sometimes it just gets seared into our brain and we just cannot forget. It's a lot of what PTSD is today. People recall and they experience it like a movie in their mind. They can't get rid of. And a lot of the work that I'm doing now in PTSD, I have learned from survivors how they help interrupt the movie. It's an interesting phenomena.
Well, I think it's interesting that you did choose television as a medium to go into, or film, or storytelling on screen. Do you know why you were attracted to that, or is it like because it was a family business, or did you need to be a storyteller yourself? Because you eventually started all kinds of companies, which we'll discuss. But why do you think you were drawn to screen storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, at an early age, literally when I was 14, having that conversation with my father, I set upon a career to create media that would be better than the lowest bar of mass communications. It was, it was really the nature of mass communications, which was the lowest common denominator. That's what content creators were really focused on during that stage. I like your concept of the hyper focus media today. I call it narrowcasting, and I have spent my entire career, focused on the transition from broadcasting to narrowcasting, and I have had equal footage in both, in both areas. And,
I remember I came out here actually to do a PhD at Berkeley in directing, but I got an afternoon job with you. That's what it was. In San Francisco, and so I'm going back and forth. And I remember everyone telling me when I first got there, Steve Michelson had founded OnePass. He founded OnePass. You were like a legend in this town. OnePass was from what I understood, was an advertising, independent video production or post-production house over on Mission Bay, which is now a completely different animal. But can you tell me, why you founded that company and how that? Turn off the phone. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was interesting because when I moved to the Bay Area, primarily because of KQED and the promise of doing documentary and independent film, at one point, San Francisco was the largest enclave of independent filmmakers in the United States, over 3,500 of them. So this was the Mecca to come for independent documentary storytelling. And I was working in Silicon Valley when I first moved here at a company called Television Associates on quadruplex media, 2-inch videotape. And it's ironic because my video engineer at that time was Steve Wozniak a couple of years before Apple Computer got started.
Oh, wow.
And during and during that year, 1974 specifically, someone came in while I was working on. That's where I got the name Stevie OnePass, because I could do a frame accurate video edit long before computers using SMPTE timecode on a videotape, and it was very much like VJs these days, rolling the wheels, stepping on foot pedals and using masking tape. So, but during that year, someone came in with a plywood mock-up of the camera of the future. And I saw that and said, oh my goodness. And they had a videotape as well about the quality of it. It was made by RCA, which ironically owned NBC at the time. And it took NBC engineers several years to figure out that this was a revolutionary product, just to show you how.
Camera? Is that pre-chip? Or
no, it was pre-chip, yes. It had diodes and other things in it, but it did not have a sensor like we have sensors today. But and required an engineer, but not the same as video cameras from a few years prior to that. So I bought that camera. I think I was the fifth person in the United States to purchase it. I begged, borrowed, and stole. I was in my 20s. I think I was 25 when I bought the camera. And I said, this is going to change everything. And that's how I started OnePass, with one camera. And that one camera became two cameras and three cameras in no time flat. And being in San Francisco, when I purchased that camera, Francis Coppola hadn't really started his professional movie making career. He was still working in audio tapes. So it was pretty early days. And, we were going to Los Angeles for everything we needed after the original shooting. And it just became obvious that, if you're shooting original material, you're going to need editing, and you're going to need sound recording, and you're going to need, as it turned out, the early generations of the paint box and different technologies in order to do finish work. And OnePass went from one employee that I had started with a friend of mine, and a co-founder and one employee, to we had over 600 employees by the time I sold it, and it became part of a public company. We were the largest post-production video company in the United States at the time, in the late 1980s. In New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Boston and San Francisco, where we managed it all. It was really a heady time, and a lot of amazing growth. Digital technology was, coming on. I literally remember the first digital device as an editor in 1974. From Silicon Valley, I got the first time-based corrector. It was a giant, heavy box, took up about 10 rack spaces, but it could stabilize the video signal. So
did you ever use the montage editor?
We had the montage. I have a really funny story about that. We had several of them, but OnePass was one of the first to install it in the United States. That was absolutely one of the most amazing devices ever, and presaged the whole world of digital and random access. We had before that the CMX 600, which was a revolutionary device, and Tom Werner, who was our chief engineer back in those days, he wrote the program for the company CMX that many people will remember. It was Tom's assembler, and he installed it, and we did a lot of advertising. It could only handle 30 minutes of black and white media. You would laugh if you saw what a disk drive looked like back in those days. A single disk drive, which could hold 5 minutes, was the size of a 13-layer German chocolate cake, that went into a device.
On our computer, this is many years later, where I don't know, an 80 megabyte external drive was like this big. It was big, 80 megabytes.
Yeah, so those were the days where, that was the beginning of the digital era, and we started it at OnePass, in the 1970s. It's hard to believe.
I actually was working at Sound One in New York, post-production film editing, before I came out here. And the montage came in to that studio, and the person who invented that, or was the head of that company, was Seth Haberman, who I am now good friends with, and he won an Emmy for that. So I think you two have a lot in common. I will have to introduce you.
Yeah, Ron Barker, who was the engineer who invented that. I think Seth ran the company, but Ron was known as the only helicopter pilot at that time who could fly a helicopter upside down. And he thought what we were all doing... he thought what we were all doing with videotape and making edits was just ridiculous. So that's where the montage came from. It's a good example of how people who are not in the industry sometimes come in with groundbreaking and breakthrough ideas that change the industry fundamentally. That has happened time and time again. But Ron Barker was the original, editing, change agent for random access editing.
When I joined Steve Michelson Production, your thing that came after OnePass, you were all about narrowcasting, right? You were all about independent video, subject-oriented content pieces. Can you tell me about how you made the transition to that and why you did? It was exciting, for me, who was just still learning, to make films about specific topics. I remember it was fun.
Yes, it was. And I used to lecture on this around the country in my back in those days, and people don't remember, it's really not that long ago, but when VHS videotape first hit the scene, it was the beginning of the home entertainment industry. We had never had that ability before to deliver a movie to a home directly. And there was a battle between JVC and Sony, which JVC eventually won, because they could fit an entire, even though it was poor technology, they could fit an entire 90-minute movie on one video cassette. And people don't recall that in 1979, 1980, I think it was, Jane Fonda outsold Star Wars. And people at Paramount Pictures their heads were turned. They couldn't believe that a video cassette could outsell a movie release. And so that began the era of studios getting involved. And I lectured and brought together a group every year for several years, both in Boston and also in Monterey, California, of all the producers who were specializing in these types of programs that were being successful. And many of them, these were not movies as we knew them, nor were they television programs. I mean, the Jane Fonda video, which was the origin of it all, was something you relied on every day, and people just loved it, and it changed their lives. And so the whole idea of video acting in a non-temporal way and not in real time necessarily, and something that was segmented over time, that became really the origin of my interest in what I called video publishing. And that was what I taught on and what I produced and what you experienced. It was really out of the box programming. I produced, my first gold title was 21 Days to Quit Smoking. Nobody could do that. It was a 60-minute program, and you watched 3 minutes a day. And it was the American Cancer Society's 21-day program. So it was proven successful. You couldn't do it in less than 21 days if you tried. We sold over 30,000 copies, in the first year or two of it. And people wrote me letters for years and years. Thank you for helping me quit smoking. So this was the kind of payback. When you were working for Steve Michelson Productions, we produced a film called Changing Boundaries, which was $1,000 video that was the be-all and the end-all for corporations to protect themselves against sexual harassment suits, which were happening at the time, at the beginning of that. So
I think we could have used that during Harvey Weinstein situation.
Well, he didn't get the memo or watch the videos. But this became the bylaws and byword, and this was a good example of video publishing because it was a compliance video, which I had never heard of before. But if a corporation paid $1,000 to buy this video, they would comply with the law, and they could not be sued directly by employees who might have had a sexual harassment problem between them. So, as opposed to going to court and being sued and having to settle for millions of dollars, which is still happening today. So, these were great examples of what video publishing could do.
Well, I remember I worked on the butter cheese video series, I think, for Wisconsin Butter Board. And you also did a series, I remember, on all the steam trains in California and Nevada,
yes,
which what I understand was very popular. But the thing is that these videos, basically, to use the word presage again, YouTube, right? Because now we can go on YouTube very easily and find specific topic-based things. How to do this, what about that, the history of this, whatever. You basically were putting that out into the world way before YouTube.
Yes, absolutely. Although these were all long form, and YouTube tends to be more short form, which is really the signature of today's, media consumer. They don't have they like to eat appetizers. They don't normally have a full meal. But I agree with you. These were examples. But Also, don't forget that the age of interactive media was happening in parallel with this. We had the CD-ROM, and eventually we had the DVD. I was very active with DVD-ROM as well, as an amazing transition prior to the internet, and also with a technology that we developed called web DVD. At the time, it was technology that existed but hadn't really been used fully as a format for documentary film. So it was a fabulous thing that we developed some great titles with web DVD. We're bringing one back right now, believe it or not, because of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and Trump's desire to drill there after decades and decades of other presidents, putting it on ice, literally. And the film we produced in 2004 and released in 2005, some 20 years ago, still that message really resonates. It was really one of the first web DVDs that we did with the Sierra Club. It was the origin and first program we had 7,500 house parties. And it really, the whole concept of interactive media with long form documentaries was really a fantastic innovation and development.
You're still pushing that, which is amazing, because interactive TV is still finding its footing. We're just seeing examples here and there. Amazon has launched interactive ads, but actual interactive media, even like we used to have on DVDs, like you're suggesting, still has not taken over, because the OEMs, the Sonys, the Vizios, they haven't made their middleware or their operating systems capable of handling this entirely. The ATSC 3.0 people, next gen TV people, would completely make this possible, but they're also still finding their footing. Anyway, I didn't want to distract people, but it's like the entire industry is passionate about interactive media, but why do you think it hasn't? I mean, well, I just gave some examples, concrete examples, but do you think that the media landscape would transform if we could make that happen? Do you think it would be better off?
Well, definitely, and we're seeing a lot of good examples of it. Even in things like Zoom, you can hit the chat, go to the chat box. These are interactive examples. People who are interested in focused media, they don't stop at the end of your content. They want to dive into more information, and however you deliver that information, sometimes it's in the form of a game, it can be in the form of content. This is again where AI.
Netflix is delivering a whole bunch of interactive games and some TV shows, so it's happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, and more deep research on the subject. Everyone, if you've created great content for what I'm calling narrowcasting, and you're calling these hyperfocused, people want to do a more of a deep dive, after they've been introduced to a subject. They want to personalize the information, they want to do this and that, and all those things are available now on the internet. So it isn't really complicated, I think, to, add the internet and content direction to media. Many people are doing it in a lot of different ways through websites and through other forms, through Instagram. It all leads to something which is really important and that I'm very focused on these days, as we are facing another transition to what we're calling event programming. And I got a message from one of my film distributors the other day from a film that they didn't want to, that I had sent to them, that they said, well, you just can't take it, because these days people don't go to movie theaters unless there's an event happening there that makes it worth their while. And the same is true with media and television, that, creating events, whether it's within the media or whether it's something that you go to physically, these are important ways that motivate people to get involved. And otherwise, you're seeing what's happening. Major studios like Paramount and Warner Brothers are emerging. It's not an accident that this is happening, and there's no real, it's representative of the amount of fall off from theatrical viewership that's out there. And television has been the same. I mean, when you look at the audiences for MSNBC and CNN even, one of my young friends who I don't form teams these days without a very large demography difference between the oldest and the youngest. And it is fascinating how they all interact. But one of my young web enabler content creators, told me, look, it's something like 65, 70% of all the viewers for MSNBC are 65 and over. So, this is the old world of television with commercials, and I have many friends, including my girlfriend, who will not watch regular traditional television because of all the commercials. So, we have to really see this traditional television as we've known it. The end is in sight in terms of the generation that no longer wants to put up with those type of 30-second interruptive ads. Things have to get a lot more savvy, and they are. People are doing advertising in very innovative, creative ways now where, advertising and content, branding and content, those are in many ways the same thing these days.
Well, your efforts to engender narrowcasting, has also spawned the era of the influencer down the road. And of course, we talked about this earlier, your son Miles, of course, was probably one of the earliest people to push that out the door with his What Is Miles Watching on TV, where he had a camera like over his shoulder or on a hat or however, predating Twitch. But are you like blown away by the era of the influencer, social media? That's all part of the event program. People, I think, talking live to their community. Maybe they're advertising something. They're all the brand influencers. It's all part of that same package. It's all personality driven. What do you think about that as the sort of main form of television today, as well as you get the little bits and AI bits and pieces on TikTok and everywhere else? But
it's stunning, really, the whole transition. I mean, in 1998, I made a film called Climb Against the Odds, which appeared on ABC Network and public television, about the first women who climbed Mount McKinley for breast cancer. And we had an audience of 26 million people when that program launched. Over the last few decades, today, if you get 400,000 people watching a public television program on the first night, that's considered successful. And most recently, I released with a good friend of mine, Stephen Olson, a film that I was the executive producer of called Healing a Soldier's Heart, about PTSD that I referenced earlier. And it was really amazing that we we used AI to find over 20 influencers who could bring us an audience of 20 million people if we had had the funds to pay and play. That's how we would have had to engage with most of those influencers. So having a parallel universe of a broadcast program on public television or on another streaming or other network, and then also using influencers as a place where you can get different forms of information, different types of related content in short form. The audiences are there, so you have to create content. We wound up taking our 1 hour documentary and creating 7 clips that we had professional psychologists and psychiatrists tell us these clips from this movie are going to be the fundamental curative clips that people can use for addressing PTSD. So here was, a total of 14 minutes out of the 60 minutes that became the source content for all of the influencers and all of the social media content that we developed as well. So it's, once again, the rules are different, but the ideas are still the same, that content, a suite of content, is now really the ideal best practice for any content creator if they want to reach a larger demographic. If they're only focused on a youth market, then they can do away with long form somewhat, although young audiences in their Gen Z and others and later, they do love documentaries, but the research shows that they start by watching the teaser, the trailer, And, a week later, if they're interested after that, then they'll watch the long form when they have time, on the weekend primarily, and they'll watch it on their laptop. So, it's important to pay attention to these trends, and the information of actual viewership is available now. YouTube Studio, I don't know if people are familiar with that. It just came out, I believe, last year or the year before, is a diagnostic center on YouTube that really provides information for a content creator.
So if there is interest in documentaries, and yet influencers are sort of driving the creation of so much content today, are you actively working with influencers on uncovering certain topics that might be of interest to that particular demographic, or are you trying to come up with a subject that you feel needs changing, or some situation that needs changing? Like, what's the impetus that will push you into your next project?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Tracy, for asking that. It's been 8 years since I have been involved with the foundation that I am now the executive director of, the Fund for Sustainable Tomorrows.org, for those who are interested. And I'm less interested in creating original programming, as I am more interested in doing the engagement and the outreach for existing program. We did produce an original program 2 years ago called Moving Through Cancer, which is available for free on the Fund for Sustainable Tomorrow's website, about how exercise is a critical component of cancer survival. It's something that only 15% of oncologists even talk about. So here is a film that's perfectly structured, 25 minutes for, that's the kind of the new feature length for all people today. It's what you can watch in a doctor's office. And this film is being distributed by major hospitals and through clinics. Even drug companies have joined to get it out there. So it's a good example of next-gen programming. 70% of it I shot with my iPhone, so it really in 4K. So it not only is breakthrough media, but it is, as I get older and can't carry heavy cameras, this is the new generation of, stability and great filmmaking through your iPhone. So this is great. But, I am working mostly on the outreach and the engagement, because there's so much content out there. But it doesn't really get traction unless people invest in the distribution, the outreach, the engagement. There are a lot of skills that I've learned over many decades now of how to accomplish that, and those are the areas that I'm interested in.
So where do you think is best to distribute this? Because if you distribute to institutions like hospitals or to doctors, there's an obvious remuneration plan for that, but that to some extent is institutional and limited, and versus YouTube, which if you upload all your content to YouTube, you're relying on advertising. What are the distribution opportunities for new cause documentaries or shorts?
Yeah, a great question. Again, really the secret, and I'm involved with several of them now, is what's called funded distribution. So funded distribution is a recognition that for you, having already created some great content, it's then time to really focus on the narrowcast use of that and to get funding for that. Philanthropists are still the largest supporters of independent film and documentaries, but these days they want to know what impact you're creating. And it's probably now been about 10 years that we invented this new position. In your day, you would have been called an impact producer when you worked for me, but impact producing is now a part of every film budget. So this is really the area of expertise and involvement. But, one good example is a film that I'm working with now called The Invisible Mammal. It's about the crisis in bats. Bats are really our front line against the next pandemic. And they're all dying from this white nose syndrome that they have. Not so much in the U.S., more in the eastern part but it's been growing over the years. So here's a film that's done extremely well in film festivals. It's really needed out there, but where? It's needed in schools. It's needed in organizations that are involved in wildlife-oriented programs. So we're getting funding, going to raise funding for that, and working with my former distribution company, the Video Project. We're hoping to get 50 screenings through funded distribution of that, which will generate sales and royalties for the filmmakers. So it's really kind of a win-win, because normally philanthropists do not want to fund filmmakers who want to pay for costs that they've already incurred. And so this is a win-win where they can fund the distribution that they want, and the filmmakers can still receive royalties from the activity. So, both parties get what they need. The filmmakers get some income, and the philanthropists get, important distribution.
I love the idea, though, of event production, or however you phrased it, where, a documentary showing might be turned into an event, which I know that you're very good at producing. That might be maybe bringing that to a big theater, turning it into an ordeal, having some speakers. I mean, is that something that would appeal to you, or can you remunerize that?
Oh, yeah. But it's just a moment in time. At one point I had developed an idea called slow media. And one of my funders said, no, we really have urgent times, let's not be slow. But the point of slow media was it takes time. It's not one moment in time in which you create social change. I'm all about social change. Media can create social change, but it can't do it overnight. It takes repeated. I've always been it's always been what I call the 5 impression rule. And it's stunning to see that sometimes if you've made 3 or 4 impressions, there's nothing. There's no activity. People don't vote for what you're promoting. People don't buy what you're promoting. That 5th impression takes them over the top, and all of a sudden you see sales activity and other people consuming what it is that you're presenting. This is the concept behind slow media, that if you're going to develop an outreach or an engagement campaign, you have to have multiple contacts, multiple opportunities. This is why an event is so good. We used to talk about trade show media as being a place where you could get all 5 impressions in one concentrated, 2-day period. They'd see the booth. They'd see the video that was playing at the booth. They'd see your signage on their way in to the, conference hall. For filmmakers to become marketers, and this is an important thing. It's ironic because when I was going to college, I had every intention to go to USC or UCLA and start my film career. And my father said, no, son, whatever you want to do in the media, you'll really be well served with a business degree. And, we fought, but he won since he was paying the bills. And I wound up at the Wharton School right across the street from the Annenberg School. And I majored in marketing, and wow, I can't even think of what my career would have been like had I not had that education at that early age. So I highly recommend to anyone involved in media to take a side.
I need that.
Marketing.
I need a business degree. That's what I need. But going back to documentaries today, there's a lot of interest, I think, still in documentaries, but people are also exploring the use of AI. Is that an issue for you right now? Because it's not just doing the research, it's also taking stills from the past or creating images from a situation. It doesn't even have to be from the past. It could be from now. Like, you can't get a shot, you create it on Midjourney, you reanimate it. Is that part of your universe right now, or how do you feel about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have several thoughts on AI. One that on that particular concept, I am very much using AI for research and other things, for finding funders. I call it, as Charles Dickens said in The Tale of Two Cities, it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. It's the worst of times because so much has been defunded that used to support this type of long form content. But it's the best of times because you can access your funders, your partners, even your audience directly through LinkedIn and other media using AI tremendously. And I highly encourage
and reduce your production costs.
All of that as well. But when it comes to the actual creation of media, I really listened. I did I did a recording recently with Jared Lanier, who's many people know of him through his involvement with virtual media. He works at Microsoft and he reports to the president.
Mr. VR.
What's that? Mr. VR,
Mr.
yes.
VR, virtual reality, yes.
Yeah, but he was asked the question about AI, and he said, it's all open source code, in terms of where AI content comes from. And what we should be doing is what we've done in music with streaming music on Spotify and others. The source creators get royalties, from the content that they create. It's not a huge amount, but because millions of people are consuming it, it adds up. And right now, if you were a documentary filmmaker, getting income from these types of streaming platforms is significant. So we can do with writers, with actors, with anyone who is being sourced by AI to create anything. Those people should be receiving royalties. That's my recommendation for the future of how we resolve the issue of AI. We can't stop it. It's here to stay, but it's not equitable for technology to reach into. AI doesn't create its own stuff. It creates stuff from sources that, large learning models, LLMs and others. So it's those source content that need to be rewarded for the success of any particular AI.
Back to the funding topic for a second. Today there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of investment in premium content. So why should funders look to documentaries as a new type of content that might, galvanize their audiences on Netflix? Like, I'm always looking for documentaries on Netflix. I don't see any premium content that interests me anymore. Why should they be investing in a flood of documentaries with you?
Well, philanthropists are not looking for success on Netflix. There are some great examples. My friend Luis Ohayos has an 8 show series on Netflix about eating. The twin study, is a great example.
I watched that. I saw that. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah, Louis won an Oscar for his first documentary called The Cove. He's a brilliant photographer and cinematographer now. But the goal of for philanthropy is to recognize that we now have what we had always thought might be possible, which is this ubiquitous nature of media. It's everywhere, and everyone has access to it. And so the result of that is that, what does that really mean? If you want to influence people and you want to create social change, then that's an equation that you can create and fund. Filmmakers often create the front end of that, the content, which is brilliant. And it often needs to be cherry-picked and massaged, like I was telling you about Healing a Soldier's Heart. And philanthropists can come in and become the engine of activity and engagement but it does take a strategy, and it does take technique and technology to reach the audiences you want to reach multiple times with multiple impressions. Those formulas have not changed over generations. But the way in which you reach people and the way in which you get data to confirm that you've reached people, the way in which you influence them and create social change, it is all part of a slow process that can happen quickly, but it takes funding to do that. So that's the beauty of it for philanthropists and funders is they can actually see. With broadcasting, we used to have the Nielsen reports, we still do. And what do they tell you? They tell you, if a household using TV, a hut, had the television on, or that it reached a household using television. These are meaningless statistics about viewership. Nowadays, we can get much more clarity on the audiences and we can reach the audiences. We can engage with the audiences. We can send them emails. They can have, communications on this subject. We can connect NGOs with the audiences that they need. All of that is possible, and it just really requires a different view. Taking all the benefits of content, media, and interactivity, the web, they all work together. They all can work together in a very synchronous way.
And it has a lot of resonance in your life, like that documentary on the twin study. It can last much longer than just watching the occasional, romantic comedy. I think it can be powerful. Any project coming up that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I'm working on a few. I don't know that I can talk about them. The Invisible Mammal is one that I'm working on right now. It's exciting. We're just getting started with that. I'll check back with you soon and give you some more information on some new projects that we are working on for sure. Yeah, okay, so I'm actually working on a book right now called Saving the Environment While Saving Ourselves by a very close friend of mine. With Neil Young has written the foreword, a former neighbor of mine. And it is a really exciting book about, from a geologist, about the things that really matter these days in terms of the environment.
Well, I'm trying to do that with the KeepCrockerReal.com cause, trying to prevent AstroTurf and cutting down all the trees and all those toxins from getting into our lungs and into the groundwater. Anyway, thank you so much, Steve. We went way beyond our normal time, but you've done so much to contribute to the world. I'm so proud to have been your mentee or your employee. I learned so much working for you, and I have just lots of warm and fuzzies about those days.
Thank you, Tracy.
Who knows if I was a pain in the ass? I don't remember, but it was a great experience. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, really, and good luck on everything with TV of the Future. You've been amazing in terms of galvanizing a whole marketplace.
I am pushing your philosophy forward in my own way. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm sure our paths will cross again many times in the future.
Of course. Okay, be sure to go to Steve's website, Sustainable Tomorrows.
The Fund for
Sustainable Tomorrows. That is the longest domain name of all time.
I know. I didn't create that, and I wouldn't. But you can Google Fund for Sustainable Tomorrows, and it'll get you there pretty easily. But yeah, you can see some of the great projects that we're working on.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve Michelson. And look up on Wikipedia all about him and his family, everything on that website. Thank you so much. And that's it. This is Tracy Swedlow. I am Tracy Swedlow, and the Tomorrow Show, the Swedlow Show. All right.
Take care. Thanks again, Tracy.
Sharp taste.